TV to working out great. Been a good addition. Thanks for getting
Yes, I have the mics. I'll be going around. Sweet. Oh, a second one. All right, sweet. He does. All right. No, they're going to come later. First is all you. Whatever you want. Well, friends, good morning. It's nice to have you here. Welcome. This is our 8th gathering of this Symposium on Spirituality and the Environment, and I shared with our friends who are going to be speaking over the course of the day and interacting with us, because we do really want that to be an interactive kind of a gathering, that it's really nice to have you here. This is a really complicated time in the Jewish community, to be sure. And I understand that might be also a challenging thing in terms of how people might be entering or exiting this kind of a community. But we're glad that you're here because we have still work to do on lots of issues, and we have work to do to build partnerships and allyship in lots of different kinds of ways. So that's why this is started, and that's why we continue to do this work. So before we do anything else, I want to let you know that there are restrooms in this social hall right behind us over to the left. You might have seen Tony at the front door. He's engaged with us and is now part of our team. But if there was ever any kinds of an issue, these are other emergency exits. And really, we're just glad that you're here and we get to have a conversation together. The very first thing we want to do is introduce you to David Backrack, one of the folks in our congregation, but he's spending some time in California these days, and he and his wife Linda have helped launch this symposium. And so we're going to have David join us for a little bit, and then we'll continue on. You're on.
Thank you, Rabbi Green, and thank you, Rabbi Bronstein, for once again blessing this event. You'll do that in a moment. Welcome, Mirella, Jennifer, and Grant, my compadre of 70 years. Welcome, everyone, especially those who have returned after COVID, and we were virtual, now we're hybrid, and those who are attending for the first time. And I want to also welcome and acknowledge our nephew, Mark Backrack from Longmont and his family, way too busy. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm going to ask Rabbi Bronstein, Deborah Bronstein, our Rabbi Emerita, just to open with a reflection and a prayer.
Welcome, everyone. This reflection was written by Dr. Celeste Rossmiller from the Catholic community of Denver. Earth, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as the mother who secures her young. Earth, teach me courage as the tree which stands all alone. Earth, teach me limitation as the ant which crawls on the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Earth, teach me resignation as the leaves which die in the fall. Earth, teach me regeneration as the seed which rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain. This is by Nancy Wood.
So, let's continue. I'm going to invite our first speaker, Dr. Mirella Goldsmith, and to tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Mirella Goldsmith is the co-chairperson of the Jewish Earth Alliance, a national grassroots network raising a moral voice on climate change to the United States Congress. Mirella directed Hazon's Jewish Greening Fellowship, a program funded by UJA Federation of New York that mobilized 55 synagogues, JCCs, day schools, and social service organizations to respond to climate change. She went on to the UN Summit on Climate Change in Copenhagen, representing 22 American Jewish organizations. She was the leading Jewish organizer for the People's Climate Marches in New York and Washington. And Mirella has shared Jewish environmental teachings in Kathmandu, which I didn't know, I think that's kind of cool, in the Salisbury Cathedral, at the Parliament of World Religions, and in other interfaith settings. Mirella was first inspired to get involved in environmental issues by a solar composting toilet that she encountered in Yosemite National Park. And she went on to earn a PhD in environmental psychology. That must have been some toilet.
It was.
To get a PhD in environmental psychology. We're excited to learn from her about how we can mobilize our different communities, wherever we might live, however we might connect, to advocate for the world we want. And on a personal level, I'm really delighted because Mirella has been a great communicator. And when I first met her as a college student, and you were working with Hillel, an organization for Jewish students on college campuses, I learned from her then, and I'm excited to learn with you now. So come and join us.
Good afternoon. This talk was advertised as being about leadership lessons from Moses for facing up to climate change. So let me start with a question for you. We consider Moses to be the greatest leader of the Jewish people. What made Moses such a great leader? Chutzpah, great.
Translate chutzpah.
Nerve.
Nerve.
Courage.
Okay, good.
Okay, good. He had grit, okay. He delegated. Great. Ooh, confidence. And who knows what he accomplished? What was it that he accomplished that made him come down in history as our greatest leader? Freedom. Okay, say it loud, right? He led the Jewish people, he led the Israelites out of Egypt to freedom. What else? The 10 Commandments. Thank you so much. And he led the Jewish people, the Israelites, through the desert for 40 years. So he was a great leader. He accomplished a lot. And we read in the Torah a lot about what made him so great. What do you remember about his background, though? What prepared him to be a leader? Do you remember anything about his background? Awesome. He had a privileged upbringing in the household of Pharaoh, right? He was adopted by the princess and raised as an Egyptian prince. What else? What about his mother?
His mother taught him a lot.
Well, his mother was an enslaved person, right? So he had these two kind of backgrounds. On the one hand, he knew the experience of the enslaved people. On the other hand, he experienced great privilege. What else? What about exile? Right, he had to run away from Egypt. So he experienced being an outsider, right? And having to go and throw himself on the mercy of other people. There's one other thing. You hit most of them, but there's one other thing about Moses when he was a child. Anyone remember? Very good. He had a speech impediment, right? He did not speak well. Now, the reason I harp on this is that Moses is kind of an unlikely leader if you think about where he came from. He really didn't fit in with either his birth family or his foster family. He was an outsider to both cultures. He did not speak well. He had to run away from his homeland. And yet, although he was such an unlikely change agent, he made an incredible impact. Now, there's another thing about Moses. Did he want to be a leader? No, he did not want to be a leader. When God called to him out of the burning bush and said, "You go down to Egypt and speak to Pharaoh, tell him to free the Hebrew slaves," he said, "No, thank you," right? He tried to get out of it. We have a whole section in the Torah that describes how he tried to get out of it. First, he tried humility. He said, "Well, who am I to take this on?" And God answered that by saying, "I'll be with you." Then he gently suggests that God isn't giving him enough information. He says, "When they ask me who sent me, what will I say?" And God dictates just what Moses should say, so he won't have to figure it out for himself. Then Moses tries another tack. He says, "What if they don't believe me?" Oh, we've all been there, right? Well, right there, God performs some miracles that Moses can repeat if anyone doubts him. But he still doesn't want to do it. And he begs God, "Please, I'm not a man of words. I'm really not up to it." And God starts losing patience with him. And God says, "Don't tell me you're not a man of words. I'm the one that's going to give you the speech and tell you what to say." And then for his last try, he tries a very direct approach. Moses says, "Please send someone else." Well, at this point, God is pretty angry. And God says that Aaron, Moses' brother, can go with Moses and do the talking. Now, Rashi, one of the most important commentators on the Bible in the Jewish tradition, says that God actually spent 7 days arguing with Moses. Moses really doesn't want to do it, and maybe he's right, because later on in the Torah, we read a lot about Moses' failures. Moses goes and tells the Hebrews that he's going to help them, and he's going to get them set free from Egypt, but when he actually goes to Pharaoh, what happens? Pharaoh does not let the Hebrews go free. Actually, it backfires. We read in the Torah that Pharaoh makes their work even harder. And Moses loses the trust of the people who are supposed to be his followers. And yet again, Moses is supposed to be the greatest leader that the Jewish people ever had. Now, like Moses, we face an overwhelming situation with climate change. Right now, the Jewish people is facing our own unique challenges of war and anti-Semitism, and I really appreciate all of you who are here with us and supporting us. Right now, it would be easy to forget about our other issues and put climate change on the back burner. I'm really glad that this program is taking place and that you invited me to speak about climate change and what we can do about this existential challenge. I have a feeling no one here needs to be reminded of the basics, but I'll remind you anyway. We depend on fossil fuels for energy to run everything in our lives. And those fossil fuels, when we burn them, are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, heating up our atmosphere like a blanket. It's like a blanket surrounding the Earth that's trapping the heat from the sun and heating up our Earth. And we know that the problem's getting worse. We have more and more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Does anyone know what the safe level of carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere? It's usually stated in parts per million of molecules in the atmosphere. Anyone know? I know someone here does. 350, very good. We know that, most of us, because of an organization that's called 350.org, and that's the reason it's called that. Does anyone know what today's level of carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere? I wish. It's 419. 419. There's actually a website called Today's Carbon Dioxide. You can look it up on any day and see. And there are variations through the year. It's very interesting. So we're seeing the problem getting worse, and we're seeing the impacts of climate change everywhere. We're all seeing it. Now, I'm from Washington, D.C., so I don't know anything about Boulder. What are the impacts of climate change that you're seeing here in Boulder? Wildfires, did I hear? Go ahead. Drought. Floods. Isn't that crazy that we have both drought and floods, both caused by climate change? Yeah. Record heat, which, by the way, is causing a lot of illness and sickness and death. That's probably the problem that's actually causing the most direct impacts on people, the rising temperatures, even though it's somewhat hidden, but we know that thousands and thousands of people are dying because of the heat. Worsening ozone, okay. The ozone comes from the cars and then it's trapped by the heat in the atmosphere. Interesting, okay. So of course we're seeing it everywhere. It's touching all of our communities. I have a list of things here. I think all of you know about this. I usually try to say a few words about the direct impact on my own community. For example, some of you may remember Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston. What year was that? 2017, I think, 2017. 2,000 Jewish families lost their homes in Hurricane Harvey. Many, many Jewish institutions were flooded. And I think one of the things that people don't appreciate is that these kind of disasters, they're not over in a few months or even a few years. I actually thought I'd just check in and seeing what's happening now with the Jewish community in Houston. And I saw that just a few months ago, in February, they rededicated the Jewish Community Center. It took until 2023 to actually rebuild and renovate the Jewish Community Center that was totaled by Hurricane Harvey. So all of our communities are suffering. And of course, who bears the brunt of these climate-fueled disasters? It's the people who are already burdened the most with poverty, racism, ableism. I recently learned that there's efforts to try to look at what do we need to do to make sure that people with disabilities are protected in the event of emergencies. But of course, people are trying to address all of these, and I just had to mention in the context of this that there's a rabbi in Tucson, Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz, maybe you know him. He works with Arizona Jews for Justice, and they work with the homeless there, who was one of the populations that are really hit hard by the heat. Temperatures there in the summer have been reaching 120 degrees, crazy. And his organization is bringing like mobile units with air conditioning and showers and water to homeless people in Tucson. And of course, this inequity is also global. The example I had here was the floods in Pakistan last year. It was only last year, believe it or not. Many, many people dead, millions of people homeless. And of course, the people of Pakistan are responsible for such a tiny, tiny share of the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon dioxide that's going into our atmosphere. And close to home for those of us in the Jewish community, the Middle East is a climate hotspot. It's already affected by drought. And I read a fact that by the end of this century, the rainy season will be reduced from 5 months to 3 months. So some of you know that we celebrate the holiday of Sukkot in the fall, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, when we build booths and we sit outside. And at the end of that holiday, we pray for rain. Well, in a few years, there will be no rain starting in Sukkot. It will take 2 more months before the rain actually starts. And this is another source of conflict in the Middle East, where people are also fighting over where's the water going to come from. I know you understand that, and one of our guests is going to talk about the Colorado River, so similar in the Middle East. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the bad things of climate change. The main point is just remember, it's about all of us. Let's go back to Moses for a second. So, after 400 years of slavery, you can imagine that it was very hard for the Israelites who had been enslaved for 400 years to even imagine that things could be different. And that's the same for us, I think. It's hard for us to imagine that we can turn things around. But these next few years are so critical because the science tells us that the goal that we should have is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, which is getting very close. And we should get to net zero by 2050, okay? So we have a lot of work. Our work's really cut out for us. So what do? Well, God told Moses to focus on a vision of the future, to tell the Hebrews that they would not only go free, but they would enter a promised land that would be flowing with milk and honey. Now, we actually are lucky. They had to wait 40 years, who said? Wandering in the desert for 40 years to get there. But we can already see a better world taking shape. I personally have seen it with my own eyes. I went to visit the Block Island offshore wind farm. That's off the coast of Rhode Island. I went with an interfaith group called Green Faith. Did I hear there's someone here who works with Green Faith? Maybe? Very good. Excellent. So we had a mission from Green Faith, an interfaith mission, and we took a fast ferry out to see this first offshore wind farm in the United States. And we heard all about how wonderful it's going to be, not only for the fact that it's producing clean electricity, but everything that goes with that. For example, we had a speaker from the National Wildlife Federation that came with us, and she talked about how in the course of building it, the efforts that were taken to protect wildlife. They were actually most worried about whales, that whales could be affected during the construction. And they had a rule that you had to stop all construction, I think it was for 36 hours, it's a while ago, but I think 36 hours to make sure that all the whales had gone away. We also had the head of the local steelworkers union with us. And he talked about how wonderful the jobs were that were created for building this wind farm. And he said, first of all, I mean, it was fascinating for me. What do I know about what steel workers do, you know? He said that what was great was during the summer, they construct the wind farm. But during the winter, they built all the extra things that you need. He called them the appurtenances, like the ramps and the ladders and all the things that were going to be attached, I guess, to the wind farm. And he said normally they don't have jobs during the winter, so that was really great for them. And then they sent all those things down to Louisiana, and there was a company down there that usually builds oil rigs. And they assembled everything, so they got jobs too out of building this wind farm. And I didn't even mention that the Block Island, this was going to provide power for Block Island, which is kind of like a holiday island that people go to for vacations and stuff like that. And the electricity there has been provided for decades by a little diesel-burning power plant on the main drag. So you could just imagine the pollution, the smell, the noise. You know, people get off the ferry for their vacation, and then they're smelling like diesel burning and everything. So they were thrilled about having this wind farm. And we all our group stood on the deck of this boat and looked up at the turning, you know, the blades. I don't know how to do that. The blades turning, you know. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It was just so beautiful. And everyone said different prayers and songs and blessings. And there was a rabbi there, Rabbi Joel Abraham, and he talked about how in Hebrew the word for wind and breath is the same word, ruach, and how this wind turbine this wind energy would be able to provide us not only with the breath of life, but with life-giving energy. So that was really, really inspiring. As you can see, I'm still inspired today. Another thing that inspires me is the Agahozo Shalom Youth Village. Anyone know about that? Anyone heard of it? No. Well, I have a friend, Anne, who was in Young Judea with me, and that's a Jewish youth group. And she went, many, many years later, obviously, went to Rwanda. She visited Rwanda, and she was very touched by the plight of the orphans there in Rwanda. And she got the idea of building a youth village in Rwanda for orphans that was modeled after the youth villages in Israel, because after the Holocaust, a lot of young people came to Israel on their own, and Israel set up these youth villages that would be a home for them. And she, to make a long story short, she managed to build one. And it's a kind of a partnership with Israel. A lot of experts came over there to help to Rwanda. And she got together with another friend of ours. And this friend of ours, Yossi, was into solar energy. And they came up with the idea, why not build a solar field at the youth village in Rwanda? They could produce electricity for the village, and it turns out there's almost no electricity in Rwanda. Almost no one has access to electricity. So they could produce electricity that could be sold in Rwanda, which is in Africa, in case I didn't mention that. And also, the young people in the village could learn how to maintain this solar field. So that would also be job training for them. And this came to fruition, and today there's the first commercial solar field in East Africa is on the grounds of the Agahozo Shalom Youth Village. I love this story because it shows, again, how by addressing climate change, we can also address many of the other problems in our world. It's really nice today to talk a little bit about peace, which here's an example of how the environment can bring people together. Israel and Jordan signed an agreement where they will help each other. Jordan will produce wind power and sell it to Israel. Israel will use that clean electricity to desalinate water from the Mediterranean, because Israel is on the coast and has access to the ocean, and send that desalinated water to Jordan, because Jordan is really lacking in water. They actually have an agreement, and that is moving forward. And what's going on in the United States? Who can tell me something really good going on in the United States? Inflation Reduction Act. Yay! Thank you, Becky. That was number one on my list. The Inflation Reduction Act, which passed last year, right? This is the most important legislation ever passed at the federal level in the United States to tackle climate change. And it's going to help us to meet our goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It has things in it like tax credits to encourage industry to produce more renewable energy, incentives for people. It always says incentives for consumers, but we're not consumers, are we? We're citizens, right? Incentives for citizens to do things like buy electric cars, insulate their homes, and actually a lot of money for low-income people so they can participate in these things that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also make our lives better. What gives you hope? Any other examples? We had the Inflation Reduction Act, but what else gives you hope that we're going to be able to tackle climate change? Kids. I agree with you. What about the kids?
Education. They're pissed.
Kids are pissed. Kids are much better educated than we ever were about the environment. And kids are having successes. We just had an amazing court case, right? Was it Montana? In Montana, where young people sued the state of Montana for not protecting them from climate change. And you know what? They won. That is awesome. Great. What else gives you hope? Booming green infrastructure jobs. Are you involved with that? Yeah. Give me an example.
I used to be involved in solar and environmental site assessments for development of land, and just green infrastructure jobs, being environmentally conscious with developments, you name it, it's just becoming a bigger industry.
That's right. I went to, I was going to tell you about this later, but my synagogue did a campaign to get people to sign up to buy green energy, renewable energy, from the first community solar field in our state. This is the state of Maryland. And we got 75 households in our community to actually switch from buying their power from the utility to buy it from this new company from the first community solar field. I think here you call it a solar garden, I think I read, where you can buy your power from the solar garden. And so we went out to the dedication, and I just wanted to talk to the guys that were working there and find out what they thought about the jobs. And I talked to this one fellow, and he said to me, I used to work on coal-fired power plants. And he said it was terrible. I would come home from my job covered with coal dust, sneezing. Whenever I would sneeze, black stuff would come out of my coal dust. And I knew this was terrible, that what I was doing was strengthening an industry that was going to be terrible for the future, for my children. And he said, now I get to work on solar fields, and I'm so happy that I get to do this. So it was testimony right from the people on the ground. Well, I wanted to say a bit more about hope just because this is such a difficult time for the Jewish people. I personally was in synagogue on Friday night, and we sang a song called Gesher Tsar Me'od, which is a song that says, all the world is a narrow bridge, and the only thing that we can do is to not be afraid. Just saying it now, I'm tearing up. I cried through the entire thing because I realized I was afraid about the future. Luckily, we have wonderful teachers who are trying to help us deal with the problem of hope, that we need to hold on to hope. One of them is Joanna Macy. Who knows Joanna Macy? Okay, Joanna Macy's a Buddhist teacher, a systems expert, who's taught a lot about dealing with the spiritual challenges of climate change. And she teaches that hope is not something that we have. Hope is something that we do. And hope means that we acknowledge the reality, but then we identify what we want and we figure out what we can do to get there. How can we move the situation in the right direction? When we do that, we don't know what the results are going to be. No one can promise that we're going to turn everything around with climate change. We certainly know that if we don't do anything, right, nothing is going to happen. And when we take action, it enriches and strengthens us. So hope is about not being unrealistic, being realistic, looking at the problem, and then realizing, what we can do about it. And if it's a big problem like climate change, then it needs a really big response. And one of the things she teaches is that we know from experience that people rise to the occasion when it's necessary. When we know something is an emergency, think about in your own life what you've seen. When something is an emergency, we look within ourselves and we find capacities that we didn't know we had. And the most encouraging thing that I've read since October 7th, of the time of the Hamas attack, was an interview that I heard with a guy, an Israeli researcher. His whole research program is about hope. His name is Oded Leshem, which I am telling you because I think you should all go look him up. And what I learned from him is that there are two components of hope. One is our motivation toward the desired goal. In his case, it was about peace. In my case, it's also about building a better world, say from climate change. And the second is our expectation. So do we think that we can get there? What's the likelihood that we can attain our goal? And he said, when our expectations are very low, it can seem like almost impossible that we can see change. But it's really important to raise expectations, raise our own expectations and those of others, and show that change can happen. And he said we need to highlight examples of what the future can look like so that people can experience it. And their sense of possibility can be raised. And the most hopeful examples that I know, as far as peace in the Middle East are concerned, are in the environmental sphere. Anyone here heard of the Arava Institute? The Arava Institute is a school. You guys can go there sometime, someday in the future, that teaches future leaders from Israel, Palestine, and Jordan about cross-border environmental cooperation. So their philosophy is environmental problems cross all borders, and we have to work together to solve them. And they teach, basically, environmental peacemaking. And right now, those students are still in class. I checked to make sure they didn't close the school or anything like that. They're still working together, talking to each other, and figuring out how we can all build a better future together. And by the way, the director of this institute, which is located on a kibbutz in Israel, is now a Palestinian Israeli by the name of Tariq Abu Hamid. I've met him, really amazing leader. So, like Moses, back to Moses, you may not think of yourself as a leader, but you can be part of the solution by holding on to hope, sharing it with other people, getting involved. Why did God choose Moses to lead the people out of Egypt? We already said, obviously, Moses didn't have the confidence and he didn't have the desire. But according to Ahad Ha'am, who's another a modern commentator on the Torah, an important leader of cultural Zionism, who wrote about Moses, and Ahad Ha'am said that Moses was chosen because he was a person of action. So we talked about Moses' origins, and we talked about Moses as a leader. But the Torah just tells us a little bit about Moses after his birth story and before we get into him being a leader. And the Torah actually summarizes this whole period. I think he's supposed to be like 40 years old when he escapes, when he runs away from Egypt. I'm looking at the rabbi here. But anyway, there were a lot of years in there. And there's only 3 things that the Torah tells us. It summarizes 3 stories in 1 paragraph, saying that, somebody probably thought about this story, that Moses comes across an Egyptian who is beating a Hebrew slave. And he decides to help. He helps the slave. The second story is that Moses sees 2 Hebrews quarreling. They're both slaves, but they're fighting with each other. We know about that, right? And Moses interferes. And in the third story, Moses runs away from Egypt. He arrives in Midian, and he sees some shepherds harassing women who are drawing water from a well. And he helps the women. And Ahad Ha'am says that these 3 incidences of Moses' early life are all that we need to know about his character. In all three, Moses encounters people that he doesn't know, but he cannot hold himself back from doing something to right an injustice. So my message is that we can act too. We can do it on three levels. Personal actions. I'm sure many of you are already taking personal actions, like making your homes more efficient, switching to electricity from gas and, I'm sure no one has coal anymore, gas and oil. Eating less animal. Who eats less animal products? Very good. That's a very, very important solution. Move your money. Take it out of the banks that are funding fossil fuel infrastructure. We did another campaign in my synagogue where we got people to switch credit cards. Give up your credit card from your big bank that's funding fossil fuel infrastructure and switch to a Green America credit card, which is issued by a community bank and supports good things in the community. Very easy to do, by the way. You don't even have to get rid of your old credit card. You can keep it just in case you want those miles. But you can, but meanwhile, your money isn't going to one of those big banks. And then it's important to do those things as a community, right? Because as individuals, what we can do is just a drop in the bucket. But as communities, we can fill the bucket. And I just gave you a couple examples of that. And then third, tackle the systemic problems. We're going to hear about that from my friend from Citizens Climate Lobby in a little bit. Lobby and push your legislators for systemic changes, for the legislation and policies that we need. Participate as a citizen, because we know we have all the solutions we need, but what are we lacking is just the political will. Along those lines, I just want to give a shout out to Colorado Jewish Climate Action, which is a group that organizes people to take action together on policy. And you can sign up. We're going to pass these sign-up sheets around. You can sign up for my group, Jewish Earth Alliance, and Colorado Jewish Climate Action at the same time. You can pass that around for anyone who would like to be on our mailing list. Okay. We're in the action part, right? So, yes, in addition to Colorado Jewish Climate Action, I wanted to mention my group, Jewish Earth Alliance, which mobilizes Jews on the national level to lobby for federal policies. We do this as part of interfaith coalitions in Washington, D.C. All the faith communities, this is an area where we're all in agreement, and we work together to influence policy. One of the things that we do at Jewish Earth Alliance is that we have virtual lobby days, and we'll be having our next one for Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish Earth Day. And if you put your name on our list, we will contact you, and we will tell you how you can participate from your house in a virtual lobby day to tell your legislators what you want them to do about climate change. So as people of faith, we have a lot to contribute to this movement. And specifically, as Jews, I would say that history has taught us to have hope and to have faith in the future. The story of Exodus, where Moses was the main character, is our foundational story. We were a small, weak nation of slaves that won freedom from a powerful empire. And throughout our history, we have faced existential threats, and we have risen to the occasion, like I was saying before, right? We found powers within us that we didn't know we had. We are resilient. And you can be a part of this great story. You don't need to receive a call from God like Moses at the burning bush. Doesn't hurt, but you don't need one. As we have seen, Moses basically became a change agent despite all of his objections and concerns. Remember that the Torah describes how Moses saw the Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave and he took action. The text actually says that Moses looked around before he took action, and only after seeing that no one was there did he kill the Egyptian. Now, the obvious meaning of this is that he was looking to see if he was alone, afraid that someone might see him taking action. But our commentaries on the Torah say that maybe he was looking to see if someone else would do something, if someone else would step up. My rabbi, Sid Schwartz, said that this was actually Moses' bar mitzvah, his coming-of-age moment. This is the moment he recognized that his responsibility as an adult to be the one in the room that would take action. Now, I'm not asking you to do what Moses did, of course, but I am asking you, encouraging you, that if you're not already doing it, and I know a lot in this room are already doing it, to open your eyes to what is happening, to look around you, to step up, and do what only you can do. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilla. So before we continue on, if you have a question, a thought, a comment before we bring other panelists, have a little bit of a wider conversation, we'd be glad to pass you the mic. Test. Yep. And we can continue a little bit of that conversation before that next part. Anybody have a comment or a thought? Be great if also just introduce yourselves. That'd be great.
Hi, I'm Ann Backrack. What's something that we can do just as part of our regular life in our house, just as we go about our day, that could be impactful for adding up to help climate change?
Well, there's a lot of things, and I mentioned a few of them, but I bet the people in this room have even better suggestions than I do, because a lot of the opportunities are really local. So what do you think that Anne can do in her house to take some steps that will address climate change? Someone over there wanted to say. Stand up and say your name. And
I'm Ann Peters. I'm here in Boulder, and I'm a recycling specialist, so I'm really enthusiastic about that. And just briefly, you probably all do curbside recycling, but there's a whole bunch of hard to recycle materials that you can use when you're done with, like electronics, tires, mattresses, plastics, heavy-duty plastics, the big wheel stuff. We have a great facility here in Boulder that's really open to all of this region called the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. But even more than that, swim upstream a little bit and just use less stuff. Mend things, repair things. Your washing machine, you can get it fixed, you don't have to get a new refrigerator, you can get it fixed. So make your car last longer. Anytime you make your laptop or anything last longer, you're helping the environment, your cell phone. So that's my pitch.
here's somebody who, yeah.
Hi, my name is Caleb, and I'm pretty young, so just take everything I say with a grain of salt. But something you can do is avoid taking baths, take showers, make them, 2 to 5 minutes tops. I know some people might like singing in the shower, but don't take that hour-long shower. Waste gallons and gallons of water. Try to make your tires last as long as possible. It takes, I believe, 4 gallons of water to make 1 tire, so really try to extend that. Oh, it's 5 gallons. Wow. Yeah, no, not worth it. Another thing you can do, there is a recycling center actually, I believe, on Arapahoe Road. Yeah. That place is great. I've actually gone there many times to replace, wires, piping, anything. But yeah, you can go out there, recycle whatever you need to. But yeah, just remember to turn off all the lights that aren't necessary. Like, some people like to leave their porch lights on at night. Don't do that. Turn them off. It's really just about reduce, reuse, recycle.
You told us about the wind farm that was making sure that the whales were not harmed in the construction process, but animals are losing habitat because of wind farms, like pumas. How can we still use renewable energy but not hurt animal habitat?
That's a great question, and we have an expert here who's going to answer that. Before she does, though, I just want to speak to the question about the personal actions at home. These are great actions, and I saw people had additional suggestions here. Here's what I would say about that. Remember what I said. We need to take action on the personal level, the community level, and the systemic level. Whatever you do at home, tell other people about it so that it has more impact. And if you can get your community, like your congregation or a club you belong to or your neighborhood association, to organize a campaign to get everyone to do it together, that's even more effective. And what you will learn, and we learned this in our congregation, is that the personal actions that we wanted to take, a lot of the time, they depended on policies. So that motivated people to get more involved in advocacy. The next year, after we did that campaign to get people to buy the solar energy, it was a lot easier to rile people up and get them to go in a group to our state capitol and advocate for more climate policies. Because people realized, here's something I want to do, but I can't really achieve what I want to achieve unless we change our policies. So put it all together. Now for, sorry, I forgot your name. Riley's question, I think Jennifer would be able to answer that really well, right?
So I just wanted to say one thing. I remember going to a conference on world affairs where one of the speakers came out and he said, we're sitting inside, there's sun outside, all of the lights are in here on. And I look around while we're sitting here talking about climate change, and I see every single light in this entire chapel or meeting place, but beautiful light coming in from the sides. You know, we could turn out a lot of these lights here. It wouldn't impact, I think, at least my experience, but it would make me feel a lot more comfortable about talking about climate change when we're sitting here saying everyone else should turn off all their lights, but we're going to sit here in a place where every single light except the emergency lights are on.
That's a great idea, and I'm going to go turn off that light behind us that we don't need. Thank you very much. Can you ask Jennifer to answer Riley's question? You got it? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the suggestion.
So I don't think anybody's putting up wind farms to harm wildlife. It's not intentional. But, you know, our society and the way we work is like big and complicated and nobody knows everything. And so, unfortunately, we've had people doing things like siting wind farms in places where they haven't thought about the wildlife implications. And so, yes, there have been harms. But what the hope that I have is that, so I work for National Audubon Society, and I'll talk a little bit more later, but we historically have a lot of people who are really interested in birds, and birds can be harmed by windmills, the big rotors. We're sometimes called bird blenders. And that's when they get sited in places where a lot of bird traffic is coming through. We used to have staff who fought off the wind farms to try to protect the birds. And we've come to realize that we can't do that anymore. But what we can do is have people working on where should we put the wind farms in places that don't have harmful wildlife impacts. And so we now have taken our resources and we're working on siting to say, working with the wind farm developers who don't know necessarily, to say, put your wind farm here. This is a place that's safe for wildlife. So when we start paying attention and connecting all the dots is when we're going to figure things like that out. And we're starting it, but we're getting better at it.
Great, thank you. Maybe we'll take this last and we'll stretch and then we'll continue with our panel, yeah? There you go.
I have three things, so I'll go fast. Okay. We also need to think about what the wind farms are actually replacing, because other sources where we're getting our energy are also harming animals. And one of the biggest problems coming out of climate change is species extinction. And so it's not just it is about looking more holistically, not just in this particular place, but what are the other broader implications. So it's, I think, moving us in the right direction. Energy Smart Advisors, if you live in Boulder County, they will come do a free energy audit, and then they will hold your hand through any changes you want to make. I had an energy audit with them maybe 18, 20 years ago, and that set them up to help me every change I've made along the way, and it's been free and priceless. So Energy Smart Advisors. Energy Smart, it's just look up Energy Smart Boulder, and you'll get it. Marilyn, Moses did not make it to the promised land, and I don't think we're going to see the end of climate change in our lives. And so as an environmental psychologist, will you talk about that angle of things, like hanging in there for the future we're not going to see?
first of all, I'm not sure I totally agree with you. I think part of hanging in there is looking at the rays of light and seeing the positive things that are happening. I told you about this guy, Oded Leshem. You can hear the podcast with him on the Tel Aviv Review. I highly recommend it. But he talks about that we need to highlight the good things that are happening so that we can see some of the change that is happening. The climate movement is called the biggest movement in the history of the world. And we've seen a lot of change. You and I, we've been there, right? And we've seen a lot of change. I mean, there was a time when it seemed unimaginable that we could really switch totally to renewable energy. Now the cost of renewable energy is much less everywhere, under almost any circumstances, than fossil fuels. So we have solutions in line. And then I think the other thing is just to remember that whatever you are doing, you are contributing to the change. And maybe that's like a part of my faith as a religious person, that I must be part of that. And I think that if you know that you are contributing to the change, in your life and everything that every day in your life, that can give you strength. It can be sometimes, it can be hard sometimes, but it can also be super enriching. And I know you know that also. That don't try to do any of this alone. Find a community and a group to be a part of and do it together with other people, because it strengthens you, it enriches you, and it also makes you much more impactful.
Great. So let's take a moment. If you want to stretch, and in about 3 more minutes, we're going to continue with our panelists, and I'll introduce you to them in a moment, and we'll continue a little bit of a conversation about the activist aspect of what we can do and how we can participate as partners in our community. So if you need to stretch. There's a restroom again in the social hall just to the left, and just in a few minutes, we're going to pick it up again. Great.
Ta-da. Sure. That was great. Yeah. So. Slide that over there. Okay. But from mute, and you can just leave it on once we start.
Okay.
Right?
Is that working now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now it's open. So once we start, you can just leave it open. Okay? Yeah, that happens a lot. You definitely want to be mindful.
Right, I know. Yeah. Well, we went a little bit longer, but that's okay. So, we're going to start up again. Let's introduce. We're going to introduce our friends who are going to be joining us. Lovely. So for the next part of our conversation, other folks will come in and join us shortly, but we want to have be committed to the ending time so folks can continue with their days. Jennifer Pitt joined the Audubon in December of 2015 to advise the organization's strategies to protect and restore rivers throughout the Colorado River Basin. At Audubon, she continues to lead the United States-Mexico collaboration to restore a long-dedicated Colorado River Delta. She served as the U.S. co-chair of the Binational Work Group, whose partners will, through 2026, implement existing treaty commitments, providing environmental flows and habitat creation. She's worked in lots of different environmental agencies, nonprofits over the course of the years, and really glad that you are here with us. Grant is a Zen sensei who began a deep exploration of the world's various spiritual paths in 1990. Through the effort, he found a personal resonance with the Buddhist teachings, and he has studied with many Tibetan Zen teachers. He's a board member of Zen Peacemakers, whose mission is to realize humanity's oneness and interconnectivity through contemplative social action. The existential risk of global warming has been a focus of his practice, and is taking him into the halls of the United States Congress as he advocates meaningful, sustainable, and bipartisan national climate policies. He's worked with Citizens Climate Lobby since 2013, where he started the Conservative Caucus, and he's a board member of the Bipartisan Climate Trust, which is a 501c3 of the Bipartisan Climate Action PAC. And we've met Mirella already, and now is the time to unmute if you're still muted, and we're just going to ask a couple of questions to cue up a little bit of our discussion, and then again we'll bring a conversation out to other folks to participate. So it would be great, and just really briefly, what brought you to your work? What was it? Was there a spiritual piece or environmental piece or an identity piece that played a part in the work that the two of you are doing? We've already heard from her and compostable toilets. But now it'd be great if you just introduce yourselves a little bit so we can have a sense of what brought you to these spaces. Go ahead.
Okay. So again, I'm Jennifer Pitt. I am a congregant here at Har HaShem. And I have been in Boulder for about 25 years, originally from the East Coast. I'm old enough that I didn't learn a lot about the environment as a kid, although that's not true. It wasn't taught in the classroom, but I grew up in a town on the Hudson River, north of New York City, and at that time, there was a folk singer named Pete Seeger who was sailing an old 3-masted wooden ship up and down the Hudson River trying to bring awareness to pollution in the river. And he came to my elementary school and sang songs, and we sat on the floor around. This happened like every year for a number of years, and later in life I went and saw him at Carnegie Hall and other places. But when I think about what brought me to environmental work, I think it was a combination of that introduction to environmental issues through song and his activism, and also some inner compass that I have that I suspect, well, it came from my family, which I think comes from my Jewish roots, that just would not allow me to set up for a career in anything other than some effort that was going to make the world a better place. That I tried it for a year out of grad school. Actually, it wasn't. I was working for a congressman. It was, he was a good guy in a swing district. But the compromises that I saw him having to make left me uneasy and unable to sleep at night. And so I learned that about myself. Not everybody struggles with that sense, but I think I got happier when I started applying my life to change the world to a vision that I thought was one that we all needed.
Thank you. Grant.
Yeah, I'm Grant Couch. Dave and I go back, as he said, 70 years, so I'm not getting away with just being a recent college graduate. We spent a lot of time as Boy Scouts up in the watershed of north of New York City, canoe trips and hiking and stuff, and I always appreciated it, but I never thought about it as anything other than something you did in the weekend with the Boy Scouts, and it was fun, and went on through life, wanted to make a lot of money, got an MBA, went to Wall Street. I was successful, and when I retired from Wall Street in 2010, what brought me to Boulder was to go to work for a company that publishes spiritual teachings by the name of Sounds True. And I did that for a couple of years and helped the company transition to being in the 21st century. The woman that started it still runs it, Tammy Simon, lovely lady. And when I left in 2010, Sounds True, I'm now fully retired. What do I do? For some reason, climate called me. And I had connections with a couple of professors up at CU and was able to get stacks of research. And when I get down to 1 or 2 inches, they'd give me some more. And over about 8 or 9 months, I spent a lot of time on it. I was an agnostic before. But I became absolutely convinced that it is the existential risk facing humanity. Okay, so what? So what do I do about that? What can I do? And I have a Zen background, raised Episcopalian, but a Zen background, and my teacher was a good Brooklyn Jew by the name of Bernie Glassman. And Bernie has a couple of very small teachings, but one of the great teachings is instructions to the cook. And in the instructions to the cook, what he teaches you is, you're in your kitchen. You've got the ingredients that you have. You don't have the ingredients you might wish you had, but you have what ingredients are there. You have what tools that you have. How do you make the best meal possible at this moment? So when I look back on my finance background and my ability to walk comfortably in a suit with a red tie or a blue tie, tie-up shoes, combed hair when I had it, I decided that I needed to start lobbying Congress. And I came across Citizens Climate Lobby, where they taught me how to do that in a respectful way, in a way that really says you have no enemies. You may be going into the office of a congressman or a senator, congressperson or a senator, and they may have views different from what you think they should have, but that doesn't make them your enemy. You need to find the common ground. You need to find a way to work together with them. What's so beautiful about their teachings was it was completely consistent with my Buddhist teachings. We're all one. I can look at any one of you, anyone around, and we can see the differences, but we are mirrors of each other. We reflect and we are each other. We make each other who we are. And when we start othering all those people, we find it so easy to other, and it's natural human nature. That's when we create the problems. So I've found this to be a great spiritual practice, walking the halls of Congress. A great spiritual practice is to walk into a room knowing that I don't know what's going to happen. but trying to go in there without a knowing mind, but to go in with a mind that tries to explore where that person is. Where can we find a common ground? Bearing witness to what the opportunities are and what the challenges are. And then listening to my heart and following what my heart calls me to do. So, for me, that's continuing to be involved in politics. And it's been a great lesson because I started off, like I think a lot of people do, sure of the other's wrongness. How well does that go for you when you sit down at the table and tell them, you're wrong, and I'm going to show you how to be right? Never works. The thing I also learned walking the halls, and I'll pass it back to the rabbi now in 1 second, is as much as my heart calls me to be there to bring this message and to share my concern and to ask for their open-heartedness and open-mindedness in terms of trying to find a solution to reduce the suffering for us all, I have to also understand, and I'm reminded of this every time I go into lobby meetings, because if my meeting's at 10:30, I'm waiting there at 10:30, another lobby group comes out, we go in. When we come out at 11 or 11:15, maybe we're there an hour, maybe we're there 20 minutes, another group's going in. And every one of those groups is leaning into the table or yelling at them or doing something, telling them why their topic is the most important thing the congressperson should be working on. They've got limited time, limited bandwidth, limited political capital, and they've got to get reelected. So those compromises that you dealt with that first year, Jennifer, are painful. They're difficult, but that is our world. That is our reality. And I would suggest that we need to be still. We need to look and don't turn away and find out what our heart calls us to do.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. Something that Mirela said that I think struck a number of people, and even one of the questions was, how do you deal with this hope? How do we do this work and not feel devastated, frustrated, depressed, or something else? I've always kind of considered myself in the hope business, not so much in the ritual business. If it was really about the ritual business, I don't think I'd have a job. But the hope business is very real. And there is this famous rabbi, and Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he says something else about hope that very similar to what we heard before about that hope is a conviction, right? It's not a wish upon a star kind of a thing. Hope as a conviction is going to shape our worldview because it has to lead to action. So it's different than prayer and it's different than wish. It is something that must be acted upon if it's a conviction. What's holding up your hopes in this conversation? Grant, why don't you go first?
Well, I'm finding myself recalling a conversation that I was blessed to have through Zen Peacemakers with 2 Palestinians, one of whom's mother's from Gaza, and 2 Israeli Jews, all 4 of whom I know well, having met them when we've been over there for peacemaker work. And the Palestinian is a Christian Palestinian, lives in Bethlehem, and he said he used to have hope, but after October 7th, he no longer has hope. He is now hopeless. But he hopes that out of that hopelessness, a new path will arise. So I share that. But for me, I don't get up each day and do what I do because I have hope and I think it needs to be done by the time I die or before I die. I forget who asked about that in the back. I do it because I don't have any choice. I do it because I have to be engaged. I can't sit back and see something happening and not do what I feel called to do, which in my case is to be on a national level. I don't do so well tabling at farmers markets and things. But we each have our different skills. Some of us don't talk well. Some of us have stutters. Some of us are petrified to do one thing or another. But something feels right. Whatever it is that feels right here, that's what we can do.
Beautiful.
keeps me going with hope, I think, again, it's my antidote to that sense that I can't be part of the problem. I need to be part of the solution, how I define it. But having seen some really positive things happen is infectious. And also, I wanted to reflect on something Mirala said, which is, humans will rise to the occasion. I work on water issues, started with river issues, but it's now much more broadly water issues. And we've mentioned already the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a hugely important, most significant climate legislation in this country. But actually, the first time that Congress passed a law that had the words climate change in it was about water. It was called the Secure Water Act, and it was passed, I think, maybe in 2008-ish, and it was because the water manager, climate change is water change. If you think about the physics of heating the atmosphere, one of the first parts of our global system to really change is water. It's changing the hydrologic cycle. And so we needed a national law to instruct our federal water managers to start looking at that and looking into what would it take to adapt our water systems as climate change impacts grew over time. So the fact that that could happen in a sort of non-controversial way on the adaptation side, but acknowledging climate change, I think gives me hope. But I do also worry that our motivation to act, the impacts of emitting carbon today are 50 to 100 years in duration, and I worry that we can't change fast enough because we're not getting the feedback fast enough. I guess I'm leaving you on an unhopeful note, but I do increasingly see unlikely partners engaging because they're coming to see that it's in their own interest, and so that gives me hope.
I just want to add one thing when Mirala was asking us what gives you hope. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I didn't say then, because I wanted to share it now, was what gives me hope, having spent now over 10 years walking the halls of Congress with a focus on the right side of the aisle, is it's very different now. The number of denialists, if you will, one hand, where before it was the party line. Now the only question is, what do we do? Not that whether we need to do anything. That's agreed upon. The challenge is, what can we agree on to do and in what kind of time frame? So that is a huge shift. And that came about because of kids lobbying, because of retired school teachers lobbying, and and people hearing, and neighbors talking to each other. Again, it's important when you're talking to your neighbors who don't agree with you about a certain topic to listen first and to find the common ground before you start trying to tell them why they're wrong. But that is a big change, a big shift in a relatively short time. Is it fast enough? No, but that's happening.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, of course.
One of the things is we don't really know how the change is going to happen. And we know that usually big changes happen when a tipping point is reached. And suddenly the change can happen really, really quickly. And we don't know when that's going to happen. We just have to keep doing our part, to make it more likely that that's going to happen, and it's going to happen more quickly. I forgot to mention this book that I'm in, I just have to say, called The Sacred Earth. It was put out by the Central Conference of American Rabbis. It's a fantastic new book with 40 different authors writing about Jewish perspectives on our earth. But I have an article in there that is about environmental psychology, and it's based on the story of Jonah, where the prophet Jonah goes to the city of Nineveh, and he starts preaching, and everybody repents. All of a sudden, they just repent. And the king decides he's going to join them. And the king, it says, steps off his throne and puts on sackcloth and ashes. And then Jonah is very angry that why did they all repent? Why did he have to travel all the way to Nineveh? And then they, apparently didn't really need his message because they just turned around and repented in one day. And I relate that to the idea of tipping points, which is we just don't know. So we have to just keep at it and know that there will be a tipping point if we keep at it.
If I might add just one quick comment, I was part of a conversation with the deans of some universities earlier this year who projected that inside of 20 years, the vast majority of college graduates' jobs will engage on climate change one way or another. And that relates to the tipping point. It's everything. It's our transportation and our buildings. It's the food we eat, the clothes we wear. It's our mental health, our physical health. It's everything. And we will all engage. And as that dynamic becomes more a part of the fabric of everybody's life, I think the structural changes in our energy systems are going to happen quickly.
I mean, another thing that gives me a lot of confidence that's going to happen is we've seen huge revolutions in the way we live on this planet before. Joanna Macy talks about, the Buddhist teacher that I mentioned, talks about we had the agricultural revolution, we had the industrial revolution, maybe now we're in the, I think she calls it the eco revolution. It's not like we've always lived like this. It's really a pretty recent thing in human history. So for sure, there's going to be big changes.
So before we open it up to everybody else, can we have one last question? And that is, if there was a single piece of issue or theme or something that you would encourage us to do, what would be the area of advocacy or change that you would encourage us to consider?
You're our leader.
Good answer.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I think what Grant said is really the answer, which is everyone has to engage with the thing they want. The one thing I would say, don't forget, find someone else to do it with. There was a great movie, if you haven't watched it, called No Impact Man. The guy did a project, it was one of these projects. He spent a year trying to have no impact on the environment. And each chapter is about a different issue. And how, could he travel with transportation that had no impact on the environment? Could he eat with no impact on the environment? Each month was a different thing. And in the movie, they did a documentary about it. They asked him at the end, well, what's the one thing you should do? And he said, the one thing you should do is join a group. Because you are not going to be able to really sustain your involvement or make a difference on your own. So join a group is my answer.
That's a great answer.
Yes, I support that. And which group? I would say that's where you come back to where your heart calls and where your tools manifest and your skills lie and where you will feel most comfortable staying with day after week after year and feel good about it. If you're with a group who has a similar goal, then it's mutual encouragement and it's more fun. So, a very good point.
Amen to all of that. I support it. And I guess, I'll just make a pitch. I work for National Audubon Society. We are an organization focused on birds, and we like to say, birds tell us that we are not doing a good job right now. And we have people like me who are, paid to figure out the really complicated systems and bring information in a way that is easier for people to understand how to engage. And we have a big grassroots chapter network, including Boulder Audubon Society working here in this town, but chapters all over the state and all over the country, and increasingly all over the hemisphere. So there is that way to get engaged. And while we tend to attract people who are excited about birds, we actually what birds need is a healthy environment and an end to climate change, so we work on all of those issues. And there are many other organizations around that work similarly, so I get involved. And get involved in whatever way calls you.
Hi, I'm Emily Hagan, and I'm really glad to be here at this event. It's beautiful. My thought is that we had a little glimpse of the difference we make when we all stayed home from COVID. And we could see the environmental aspects, the health aspects, the nature thriving without us, right? Going out every day and doing all the things that we do. And so I just wonder how we can use that glimpse of hope to give a bigger vision of what we might do in the future.
Madam Leader?
Well, I'll say something about that. I just think that people often don't realize how different things can be. And I think the pandemic, as you said, really gave a glimpse of that. And we need to keep reminding ourselves that, yeah, when called upon, we were able to really make changes in our lives for the good of society, for good of each other. You know, all of us staying home, we stayed home not only to protect ourselves, but to protect others. And it had a big impact. You know, all of those, our individual activities added up to a real change on the environment. So I think telling people, you know, just reminding ourselves of the fact that change can happen is a really important part of this.
You got one?
Okay, so this is, I feel like, a kind of Colorado specific, so I don't know, but yeah, you talk about the environmental psychological angle of things. So how do you go from, we live in Colorado, and I see a swimming pool in like every backyard, right? And we're talking about, okay, so for a short period of time, we all stayed within our communities and didn't use all these resources, and that was amazing. So how do you take an entire society, which, you know, you can't, people have to have incentives, right? So, and you can't tell people really like, hey, do or don't do this with your money legally, necessarily. So how do you then bring that whole societal shift back to community level involvement where maybe we don't have to travel so far to get a grocery or travel so far to get this, and then also, you know, if we're gonna implement a water restriction on people in Aurora from this hour to this hour, how they can use their water, then why can we then go out to Broomfield or anywhere else and then have new developments coming in, and the new developments are also building swimming pools in every yard? You know, how do we get to that point where we're saying, okay, you know, I don't want to stop you from doing what you want to do with your money that you've earned, but also how can we ethically keep building these kinds of communities as well?
I think that's a good one for you.
All right, well, you're all sitting down. You already know I'm a Buddhist. I'm also a capitalist. And I say that because it's my opinion that the foundational policy that Citizen Climate Lobby was lobbying for was a carbon price. So it would price things that bring in that externality of the CO2 that's being generated into every single product that we buy, so that we start modifying our purchasing behaviors as consumers and citizens.
Citizens, yeah.
And that money that's raised, what the policy advocates is to give that all back to everybody as dividends equally, not with regard to income. So it actually is a progressive tax, if you will, because rich people spend a lot more money on energy and stuff like that. I worked with a guy 12 years ago in California whose utility bill, because of fountains and pools and air conditioning and everything else and lights in the garden, was $6,000 a month. He made so much money he didn't care. But if it were $25,000 a month, it might get his attention. So I think pricing things, now that's something that I know from my political activities is not viable politically right now. It may never be. But that's how we can make changes. If people At the micro decision level every day, each individual person gets to make their decision. Oh, these blueberries that just flown up here in February from Chile, now they cost $10 instead of $3.50. Maybe I don't need 2 boxes. That's how we can change things without putting effectively a gun, an economic gun to people's head, or rules that you cannot have pools anymore. Well, that's the trade-off in life, right? That's a compromise. How important is it for someone who couldn't afford blueberries anyway to not be able to really not afford them anymore? I mean, if we're improving the environment, and we have to be very careful, one of the things I didn't really learn until I've been involved in this in several years is economic justice, racial justice. These are all becoming more and more aware across the aisle now, fortunately. As a white guy, privileged white guy, I always resented the way I was told I was privileged. I only figured that out like 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not proud of it, and I got more work to do. But I think what we need to do is find out what we can get done today and do it. And from that, tomorrow, something else.
I just had a couple of thoughts, which are that, hi, I'm Becky O'Brien. I'm a member of Har HaShem, and I work at a Jewish environmental organization where Mir and I used to be colleagues. The two things I'm thinking about, one is not having the deprivation mindset of we've got to make these huge sacrifices to get to the future we want. Like Mirala is describing with this wind farm, like this is the better alternative. This is the thing that is healthier, and it's giving us the same electricity that we had before, but we're doing it in a better way. And that can't be true in every single category, but there's so many, like work I do around eating more climate friendly. There's so much delicious, available, healthy, more affordable foods to us. It's not about making sacrifices. It's running towards a much better future. So to the extent that we can hold some of that in mind, that there's so many things that we want. All these people, that I don't know the exact numbers, but all these people who switch to electric cars, they're like, yes, I will never go back. This is the car that I always want to drive. The things that we want to see to have a climate-friendly world are things we want. Not things we just are going to have to sacrifice and live with. And then the other comment is that it's really easy for us to look at other people and that they're not doing enough. But generally, all the people who are on board and believe in climate change, we are not doing enough. And so I find that I feel more hopeful when I spend my energy not trying to convince somebody who's not really convinced and doesn't want to give anything up to do it, but to go to the people who are already convinced and have more area to make improvements. I don't care if I'm bringing someone from 0 to 3 or they're already at 5 and I'm bringing them to 8. I still moved us 3 steps forward. And so if you're wanting to be inspired, go to the people who believe in this, want to make a difference, and do more yourself and help others do more. Wasn't a question, but I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on if those things feel true to you.
I'll make a comment, which is, so my day job is working on our water supplies across the West from Wyoming down into Mexico, and it's based on a 100-year-old legal platform that is really not suited to what we need today. And there's a lot of, when people get it, especially I talk to a lot of students, when they get it, they're like, can we just get rid of this and start over? And there's complicated reasons. It's a property rights system. I think one thing I've learned in my time in the trenches is that it's okay that we're not having a revolution where everything changes tomorrow. We are walking in the right direction, And to making that progress is better than not making that progress, even if you're frustrated that the revolution isn't here yet. And we may get there because of the tipping point that Mirla talked about. And so I've experienced that as a professional, but also as a mother with a daughter who's a freshman in college now, and she has been enormously frustrated with the state of the world that she sees. And the best thing I've been able to tell her is, if that's your composition as a person, no surprise, because we're your parents and we're that way too, then for your own sanity, like engage, get involved, and do something about it. And none of us can do it all, but all of us can move it forward.
I think I just would add, right on, but I just add that there's a intense complexity in the systemic, holistic system of electronic vehicles, of wind turbines, of batteries, rare earth metal requirements, geopolitical issues, toxic waste. What do you do with that stuff when it's no longer usable? And I think a lot of people who are well-meaning and want to get us moving forward in the sustainable way charge ahead fighting for something, and they don't hear anything about, well, hold on a second. We can't put the wind farm right in front of the major flyway for the birds. That's all, is one thing, but there's also the waste and the sacrifice that people make, and the mining, and I mean, this is, not to say we shouldn't be doing everything we're doing, it's just, let's just really be open to what's really going on.
I would add to that I think all these problems are so complicated, you know, but that's where one of the spiritual things comes in, that, you know, we have to use less. We in the Western world, we in the developed world are causing a lot of, you know, more than our share of the problem by our consumption. And we could use so much less. You know, our country, the United States, wastes 50% of the energy we produce. Think about that. We could, without even changing our lifestyle at all, if we would just reduce the waste, you know, 50% less fossil fuels, you know, 50% less of, you know, materials used that are affecting biodiversity, water, everything. But in terms of energy, we waste 50% of what we use. So I think that's where our spiritual, by cultivating the spiritual capacity to look at ourselves, to appreciate what we have, to understand that what makes us happy is not more things, you know, to appreciate each other and community, you know, that's where, I think where our spiritual life comes into this and can really make, you know, a huge difference in the material world. I don't know why I started saying that, but but that's another facet of solving these problems. Like, everyone doesn't need their own swimming pool, you know? Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying part of it, there's all different ways to address it. One of it is to make it expensive, make the water expensive. Another way is to cultivate community, to cultivate a feeling of, you know, satisfaction with our lives, with gratitude for what we have. And they're all part of the solution.
Build a community swimming pool. That's what I thought of when you were sharing that example. Yeah.
A lot of these communities, they do have a community swimming pool, and every single backyard still has one.
Wow.
If you're passionate about it, Danica, you need to get on it. Yeah.
And yet, like, you know, on the news they talk about water restrictions, but you see the corporate offices watering their lawn in the middle of the day when they're losing 20% of
I see the day when it's going to change, and it's because you started the movement against personal swimming pools.
Yes. and overwatering corporate lawns. Yeah, no, I agree. And you know what you just said about appreciating what we have, I want to just say, I think something that gives me hope is that human capacity for reverence, like that, and I share just, I'm a person of faith, my husband's an atheist, and it took us a long time to realize that we actually shared reverence, which to me is a very spiritual quality.
he's an earth scientist. So that reverence can start with the earth, and really anywhere, any day, this moment right now, that we revere what we have, that we honor it. To me, that moves forward. And I was thinking about the question, like, what gives you hope? And there's a lot of external actions, but I think the more you can keep reverence in your community, your family, your wherever you find yourself, I think that's really, and I wouldn't mention this in a lot of the environmental settings I'm in, but since this is about spirituality, I feel like it's a kind of a secret weapon. Maybe
I'm really glad you said that.
Word.
I'm really glad you said that, because a lot of times people ask me, why do you do your environmental work in the faith community? Yeah. Why don't you join? I could have joined Audubon and done this work. But I do think that the faith community, our faith communities, have a lot to contribute. Whether it's through the education, through cultivating these, spiritual attitude, toward building community. And even, I see it even in political work as a lobbyist. When you go into a legislator's office and you say that you're coming from a faith community, you're listened to in a different way. It's not a better or worse, but it's a different avenue. People a lot of times are very surprised to hear that we're Jewish people coming to talk about climate change and to talk about the environment. They're very interested in what we have to say.
Yeah, I think reverence, thank you, is important, and the spiritual spin. It's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Spiritual spin. Because it's taught that we're supposed to be shepherds, and we haven't been. And I'm reflecting back on David's comment about how we've known each other for 70 years. When we were Boy Scouts, I didn't have an air conditioning window unit. I had a fan. We rode our bikes everywhere. We weren't driven to school. And we were happy. We were happy. We didn't know that we were supposed to have more to be happy. And so I think the problem with our world isn't, in my opinion, that it's a capitalist-based economic system. It's that it's consumer-based. And we're taught every day we don't have enough. And we're embedded with this idea that we always need more. By the way, Buddhist teachings will tell you that is a standard way human nature operates. So it's not like Madison Avenue's the bad guys. It's just they know how to take advantage of what it is we're already wanting to do. So we compare ourselves with our neighbors. They got swimming pools. I'm going to have one too. So the spiritual part's very important. And we cannot keep doing what we've been doing and expect a different outcome. We have got to change. And people don't like change unless it's more.
I have a question on, what are your thoughts on the fact that kind of having more renewable items such as, electric cars, more often than not, they are incredibly expensive. And even when you do have them, there aren't really charging stations everywhere. That's an issue I faced back when my mother had one of those cars. She did switch back to a diesel-fueled car, and we had to keep one just to go on a road trip because it couldn't take that journey. Some of my friends who are from lower-income families wouldn't even dream of having an electric car because the cost is just insane. And to have an electric charging station set up at their home, that's just an extra cost. So what are your thoughts on the almost inaccessibility to renewable resources just to the public?
I guess I have one thought, which is, right, we're not all going to switch to electric cars and having that infrastructure for the charging stations overnight. We got to ramp up to it. It's that slow change I was talking about. And, the way it has worked here, there has been some subsidy from our federal government. Even I think our state government has gotten involved here in Colorado. But, it's in the beginning, the costs are high, and it's people with the pocketbook that can make that investment. But as more and more people spend their money on those cars, it starts to, with the economy of scale, should drive the price down and moreover show that there's a public, some number of people in the public willing to drive those cars. It's a kind of a pilot that worked. And then you see more money coming in from the federal government to build out that infrastructure of charging stations. So I think, and I'm no expert on electric cars, although I do drive one, a Leaf, it's parked outside. But I think it's that, you know, I have the gray hair, so I can say, like, have the patience and keep at it and have faith, and you will see things change in your lifetime. I mean, I've seen things change in my lifetime that I never thought would come to pass. Gay marriage legalized in the land, that was not a, you know, I went to school at a time when people were bullied for, if they even had the courage to say that they were gay. So I feel like things can change, and I don't, and like, don't be patient, get involved. Work on it, move it faster, but don't give up when it doesn't all change overnight.
Yes, and I want to specifically acknowledge the accessibility question. It's real. It's not right, but it's real. What do we do about it? Well, Jennifer's very right. The more electric cars we build, the cheaper we can make them so they become more affordable. We also have in Boulder, I don't know whether the whole fleet, but much of our bus fleet is now electric. So this is, it's shifting. I mean, yeah, yeah, it's needs to be acknowledged. Thank you.
I want to just add that, like, the equity problems we have in this country aren't all related to climate change, you know, and energy use. We have a huge problem of inequality that's getting worse in this country. And these accessibility issues are part of that. And in the climate movement, we kind of hope that actually the transition to a more green economy, a more sustainable economy, could be part of the solution. And there's a lot of investment and a lot of enthusiasm, you know, and energy behind that. And just like on the federal level, the federal government now has, under President Biden, this Justice 40 initiative, which is that 40% of all money that's put out for the transition, for the green economy, should go to low income and communities that have been historically, you know, disinvested in. So there's a lot of effort to try to make sure that this transition, unlike some other ones, doesn't leave people behind. And in the big picture, I have to say that I don't think the electric car thing is the most important thing. I think more important for low-income people and for our society in the future is public transportation. We need to be, you know, I think for political reasons, the electric car is a big focus, you know, the individual car, you know. And it is important, very important. But the fact that we're now looking at electrifying trucks, that's hugely important. And having better public transportation, not only making it run on green energy, but also just better public transportation so people don't need their cars. I'm so impressed. I walked from my hotel. I've never been in Boulder before. I walked from my hotel to here, and there were bike lanes all the way. That was awesome. On the other hand, there were almost no bikes, and there were very few people walking. I saw a lot of cars. So we you know, there's a lot of levels on which we have to make this change happen.
Thanks. Let's have our last question.
Oh, I was going to be a comment. I think it was said before, but like just what everyone can do on their own individual level. Like not everyone's going to be able to take 2-minute showers because some people might have, you know, shower chairs that they need or anything like that. But some people can walk to work as opposed to driving their car. And I think a lot of it, at least in my opinion, also comes from a compassion standpoint. Like if someone can't do the 2-minute showers or walking to work, then at least like acknowledging that they're doing what they can if they are, and